Alright, this is going to be a new what if called What If the Fantastic Four was reincarnated in the MHA universe as Kiroshima, Hagokere, Izuku, and Totoroki. So, in this timeline, things are going to be a lot different. In the sense that, in this timeline, basically, after, the whole Fantastic Four dies of old age, and they've basically lived their lives to the fullest, their souls basically get reincarnated all in Japan. In the future of basically like 500 years in the future. And the reason the Thing actually ended up dying was because he died in his human form, like 100 years later. And because of this, their souls were basically reincarnated because Franklin Richards, Reed Richards' son, basically made a deal with death that basically Franklin actually made a deal with Galactus that made a deal with Lady Death that their souls will be reincarnated in the future, and he will become the new devourer of all worlds. And Galactus' deal with her was that when he dies, his soul will be hers. So basically, it's an exchange kind of thing going on. And yes, Franklin Richards is still alive, and Valeria actually ends up taking over as the Queen of Latveria, and her family is basically the royal family of Latveria now, and Doctor Doom is actually gone, but he is still remembered as one of the greatest kings of his generation. And since Valeria had her family, they actually ended up becoming a really powerful family and eventually expanded their kingdom further all the way into England. And yes, this is a good timeline for this. So now we cut into basically how they're all gonna meet and how. Well, actually, we're gonna start with Izuku. So in this timeline, as Izuku is born, Reed Richards' soul is transferred into his body, except he can't control the body, only Izuku can. He's basically a soul remnant of his mind, basically. Think of it like how One For All works with him, except now it's just Mr. Fantastic. And yes, Izuku actually does have a quirk, which is actually going to be super intelligence. So yes, Izuku's IQ is going to be like 550. He's going to have a 550 IQ. So he's going to be extremely smart. He's going to basically be at the level Reed Richards was when his whole story ended or whatever. Like, basically during the beginning of the Fantastic Four, basically. But he's just as smart as him. And Izuku finally meets Reed when he actually turns 10. Actually, no. When he turns 4. Since that's when his quirk is activated. And I think it makes sense, because the doctors actually won't be able to steal his quirk, since, yes, Izuku's doctor was the one that actually stole his quirk. That was kind of confirmed, but not really. But at the same time, it could be possible he just never had a quirk to begin with. But either way, Izuku's quirk couldn't even be stolen, because it wasn't a physical quirk where it was like he can project fire or something. It was a mental quirk that he had. So it was an ability that couldn't be obtained through stealing it. This was a new kind of quirk. This was like a quirk that was bound to his soul, basically. his very being. And when Izuku did turn 4, he actually met Mr. Fantastic in a dream. And Mr. Fantastic explained to Izuku that his quirk isn't just intelligence, it's also the ability to stretch his body. But for now, he'll only be able to stretch his arms because during the time when they were basically floating in the soul plane to be reincarnated together, they ended up losing their powers in exchange for reincarnation. Except small fragments, which Izuku now has of original Reed's powers. So he has, like, he can basically only stretch his arms and legs. The rest of his body can't really do much. And I'm taking inspiration from the 2015 movie from the Fantastic Four, where it's like, basically, they make, like, a particle accelerator kind of thing going on, and then it's like a super space nova accelerator or some shit. I don't know what it's actually called, but it basically is going to be a big key factor in this. And Izuku ends up training for the next he ends up training alone in the forest for the next 6 years alone with the powers he's gained, and Izuku actually develops an entire fighting style based off of his abilities. And he knows how to regain all of, like, the rest of his powers. So he's got to find the rest of his teammates. Now, the same thing is basically for, like, Hagokere, Totoroki, and Kiroshima. And the only things that I'm going to say about them is, since this is going to be like the same kind of concept for all of them, like they only have fragments of the power, Totoroki doesn't actually gain his father's fire, he gains Johnny Blaze's fire. But it basically amplifies his already mastered kind of quirks, and it kind of makes it so the fire side of him takes over more than his ice side. So Totoroki can only use ice in his feet now. And he can also use fire in his feet, but it's mostly fire-based powers. Actually, no. You know what? No, I have an idea. So basically, instead of him only having the two powers, he's going to have one power where basically both the ice and fire powers fuse together to where he basically uses his ultimate move in the game, or not the game. It's like in the comics when he combines both of his quirks together, making it so like he can make a cold fire. That's basically, he has blue fire. Like a cold blue fire that burns, basically. That's his quirk now. And he does have all of his memories from his past life because Johnny Blaze and his soul actually fused in this, like at a very young age. And Totoroki actually gained some of the personality traits from Johnny that Johnny has. Like, he's a little cocky, a little arrogant, but he's not too... He will learn... He will get traumatized still. And he will gain the scar, and Johnny will be pissed, of course. He will obviously be pissed about this. But it's honestly whatever. And then, for Kiroshima, he's basically going to have his original powers, except now his arms are permanently stone. Like, if you've seen the picture, how he has, like, most of his upper forearm, like, put, like, encased in stone, basically. Yeah, that's what his power is now. Basically, he can turn all of his body into stone, but now, like, only his forearms are truly stone. And then, for Hagokere, she's like permanently invisible until she meets Invisible Woman at the age of 4. Basically, yeah. So since her quirk is like a mutation quirk, and Sue's is like an emitter kind of ability, the abilities actually end up fusing, making it so that she can actually transform into her visible form and her invisible form, and she does have the ability to use slight, like, telekinesis. It's not really telekinesis, but it's like she can kind of use the shielding ability. So it's kind of like she can make small finger shields or like palm-sized shields, but nothing to the extreme. And that's all the characters' powers and all that. And then we're going to get to where they all meet at the age of 10 years old. And again, I'm taking inspiration from the 2015 movie, where basically Kiroshima and Deku actually meet when Deku blows up his science project. And Kiroshima isn't a bully or anything, but Bakugo did try to bully him. And basically it didn't go so well because Kiroshima stepped up for Izuku and basically stopped Bakugo. So when this happened, they instantly became best friends. And Kiroshima and him actually became super close. 2 years go by, and then they meet basically Totoroki and Hagokere, because Hagokere and Totoroki already met because they knew they were technically soul brother and sister. So they actually ended up becoming a lot closer, and he actually started to heal from his trauma that he gained from his father and his mom, because, you know, he still got the burn mark. But he was happy to have his sister, his soul sister, back. And then basically 2 years later, when when all four of them are 12, they end up meeting in the park when Izuku is doing a little experiment, basically trying to see how far he can stretch his abilities. And they end up meeting. All of them end up meeting. And Reed realizes that they're all back together now. Like, they are now the Fantastic Four again. And Reed basically said, "Hey, Izuku, you found your team now. Now you get to be the new Mr. Fantastic. And now I will fuse with you to let you gain a little more of my power." And basically all the soul fragments that they gain, that they all have from their original, like, incarnations, basically comes to them in the sense, like, they only have the original 50% of their powers. So Izuku can now basically use his arms, his legs, and his, like, kind of his torso. Like, basically he can stretch his whole body, but he can't transform into anything. That's all I'm going to say. He can't transform into anything. For Hagokere, she can now use her shields to a bigger extent, but not to the extent where Invisible Woman was. And then for the Human Torch, or basically Totoroki, since he already had fire-based abilities, instead he's actually going to get his full power. Or basically what would be considered his full power, but he won't gain his full power until he actually gets into the incident where they gain their powers. Honestly, I might not do that whole accelerator thing. I might actually make them go to space to gain their full powers. So, and then basically Kiroshima got his full powers, and he can turn into Ben Grimm's true, like, rock form. He can do that. It's just he doesn't really try to, because he can't hold it for that long. I mean, yeah, he has to practice with his powers, but since he already had rock-based abilities, he can't actually do what he did in the anime where he basically goes ultra and, like, kind of does his thing. So it really all depends on their powers, but I think that's where I'm going to end it, guys. If you want to have me do an actual part 1 for this is just a part 0, but if you want me to do a part 1 for this, I will. And yeah, I'll see you guys later.